Today, we'll be discussing what it means to live like Christ.
We're also going to have a fellow podcaster and education minister, Dillon Bruce, with us today.
My name is Logan Bruce, and I am joined as always by Zack Griffin. Zack, say hi, everybody.
What's up, everyone? I'm Zack Griffin, and it's good to have everyone here for our episode 3 of Bearing Up.
Yeah, and today we've got a very special guest, someone who I'm actually very close with. We actually grew up together for many years. He's my little brother. And Zack, I can't even remember. Do you have any siblings?
Yeah, I have a younger brother too. And I was about to say,
nice.
This is definitely a special guest.
Right. This is very, big deal.
Especially.
And so I'm excited. I don't think I've even told him, but we've got some stories I want to tell, kind of like to get us revved up here today. About him, but I'm interested, Zack. How much older are you than your brother?
So about 2 years. So he's 2 years younger than me.
Okay, so I'm 4.5 years older than my brother, and we were just far enough apart that I was always like just enough better than him at sports, at most everything, until he got to where he was physically the same as me, and I was like, I don't like this anymore. And I quickly found out that it wasn't because I was just more gifted, but it was because
you're older.
He was right. Well, it's different growing up with siblings. Right now, I've only got one daughter, and my wife and I, we've talked about having multiple kids, but right now we've just got one kid. And so it's something to be said for having siblings, and something to be said for like having people around you who are on your same level. Because as a kid, your parents, by design, by God's design, they're up here, and you're supposed to respect them, especially when you live in their house, and they're supposed to mirror God for you. And so I think it's a huge deal for kids to have siblings. Now, if you're an only child, or if you have an only child, I get it. Like, sometimes that's just what happens. But I was very blessed to grow up with a little sister and a little brother. And Zack, obviously, you were too. But I want to tell. We're gonna kind of tell stories. And Zack, if you have a story about your siblings, you can go for it as well.
Well, just before we get started, so
right,
that it's interesting because really, we're like a year to 11 months different. So basically 2 years. We were really, really close in age. And so I felt like we fought all the time. Like, yeah. we threw hands a lot as kids. In the yard, elbows, all kinds of stuff. And I'm just, wondering, since that's, I guess, something I remember growing up with a younger brother is, was that something because of the age difference that y'all
right
had?
So we would get into it, but after a while, we are both 6'5", 250 plus, and so we are not by any means small, and the normal house cannot take our wrestling. And so we would get to wrestling, and my mom got to the point where she was like, go outside in the yard. And I think we maybe did that once, and anytime she would say that after that, I was like, I'm done. Like, I ain't going outside. I don't want any part of that. And so I'd quit. But that was pretty much the end of that. But yeah, we would get into it a little bit. But like I said, for the longest time, and until I was probably in college, I was always bigger. 90% of the time I was better. Right towards the end of high school, he could pretty much outshoot me in basketball. But that was, I was just enough, because we were never in high school together. I was just enough older that I could pretty much take care of things if I needed to. And so, but once we got into college, I was like, oh man, he's right kind of there. And I came back from college one year and he was right there, and I was like, oh man. But so no, yes and no, I guess. We did if we really needed to. There's something also to be said, though, about growing up in a Christian home. And I kind of want to talk about that for a minute, because that's kind of where our conversation is going to lead eventually. As a parent now, it feels so different than anything I've ever experienced. And I always said, even before I was married, before I even met my wife, you don't understand God really until you become a parent. And I said that because I had heard it said. But now that I totally understand it. Looking at that, I feel the pressure of needing to raise a godly house, because I'm not only affecting my salvation, I'm affecting the salvation of my wife and my kids. And where are they going to land on some of that stuff? And so we had a great life together, but a lot of that stemmed from what my parents established is we're going to have a Christian household. And it was easier because my dad was a minister and we were always at church. But beyond that, even before my dad became a minister, we were there at church, and my parents established us as a Christian. We're going to be a Christian household. And so there's value there. And I know, Zach, as a parent, you feel that same way.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I agree. And I guess we had kind of a different upbringing. I mean, of course, a different household. We're going to have a different upbringing. But my dad, he didn't go to church, really, as we were growing up. So it was my mom that brought me and my brother to church. But at the same time, my dad did have, and still does have, he has a respect for God and the values that come from the Bible. And so he was an enforcer growing up, I wouldn't say I guess there's a difference between authoritarian and authoritative, but he tried to lead me on the path of right as he could. And so my mom did even more so, I feel like, in regards to living out the Christian values, because, she stayed at home, and she also, was the one that took us to church, made sure we were at a Bible class, and she would ask questions, and engage in discussion at home, which I think is so important because, when we're talking about Christian homes and growing up and being a parent in a Christian home, you have to realize that if your children are going to be faithful in the Lord, there has to be more than just Sundays and Wednesdays. There's got to be more than just that time where, you're meeting for the assembly. And so she took that upon herself to talk about those things and to teach those things in the home as well. And so that's something that, one of the first words I tried to get Graham to understand and to say was Bible. And actually the other day I noticed on, how Facebook has the memories or whatever. There's a video of him, and he was one, and he was saying Bible. That was one of his first words, and that was intentional. Now you ask him who God is, and he'll talk about how he created everything, and he's Jesus, and he's 3 years old. So it takes a little bit more than just going to Bible class, to do that. You have to grow up in a Christian home.
Absolutely, and that's what you said there. You alluded to it, that it's more than just Sundays and Wednesdays. That there's this movement, especially now with the way that people are starting to come back to church from the coronavirus pandemic. That you come to church, get to church, and that's amazing. Be at church, but what are you doing when you're not there? Because that is, and I preach this as a youth minister, that is such a minuscule part of your life. That if you are failing at home and as a dad and as men out there, as your dads and your husbands, and sometimes it's on the wives too and on the mothers too, but as that person, as that spiritual leader, what are you doing? With my daughter, we'd have Bible study, and she's not even 3 yet, and we would sit there and get her beginner's Bible with the pictures, and we'd read it. And my favorite part of that was when she would repeat what I would say. So I would read a sentence, and she'd repeat the last 2 or 3 words, like somebody does when they're like intentionally trying to listen. That was what she was doing. And so that's a big, something like that. I mean, it's so simple, but it's so important. And that's the kind of house that I was so blessed to grow up in, and so blessed that, even when we didn't go to church on Wednesdays, I remember my dad sitting us down and having a Bible study, and we were doing those things. And so, and I totally get not everybody has that. And like I said, we were blessed, me and my brother, and my sister, we were beyond blessed. And, there's something to be said as now that I'm a parent that I want to make sure that my kid feels the same. Well, one story real quick before we dive into our recommendations I want to tell about Dillon. And this give you a huge idea, Zach, since you don't know my brother super well. But this will give you a great indication of like who he is. It was one Thanksgiving. He's going to know immediately when the story I'm telling. One Thanksgiving. This is by far my favorite story about my brother. We had family over from Colorado down in here in Dallas, and there was so much that we had to put an air mattress in the living room. That's typical. Big king or queen size mattress. Well, during the day, that's very, very, you can't just leave it there. You got to put it out of the way. So we had stuck it up behind the couch, facing the backyard and the window, and it was just sitting there. Well, Thanksgiving meals, about being prepared, and everybody's getting ready. And my brother and little cousin are in the other room, and they're kind of playing around. And what my brother was doing was climbing up the mattress like it was a mountain. And I can't even remember how old he was. He's probably, he's not a toddler. He was about 4 or 5, probably 5 or 6. And so not very old. But he was climbing up the mattress and then sliding down. That's fun. I get it. Like a kid's a kid. If my kid were doing that, I'd be probably encouraging it. But he was climbing up this thing, and he would grab onto the top and turn around and slide down. Well, I don't know how it happened, but all of a sudden, we all hear this huge, and that may have been too loud on the microphone, this big crash. And we all turn around, and the mattress here's the couch. It's out the window. And we're all like, what's just happened?
Oh, man.
And my little brother, 6-year-old, he just walks around the couch and is like, deer in the headlights, like, what just happened? And he had like fallen through the window and like through plate glass out this window. And I don't think he went out the window, but he definitely hit it. And it shattered the window.
Wow.
Well, my dad and uncle, they start to take it out, and they've got gloves on, and their hands are just being cut to shreds through this glass that my brother did not get a scratch on.
Wow.
So my brother, absolute daredevil, as a kid, just loved to be, and he had no shirt on. He had no shirt on, basically fell through a window and did not get a scratch. And it's interesting. He's this daredevil. I've never had a broken bone in my life. Mm-hmm. Like I said earlier with the story about wrestling, like anytime my mom made us go outside, I was like, nah, I'll stay inside. Wow. I'll quit fighting. But he's an absolute daredevil, and but more importantly, he is passionate for Christ and passionate for our God, and I'm so excited to have him here today.
Well, it sounds like God was with him that day too.
I fully believe he is a guardian angel. And maybe we'll do an episode on that sometime about angels. Actually, that kind of maybe be a next episode thing. But because I have stories to tell with on that. But anyway.
Well, the Lord knew what he would be doing today, for sure. For sure. And what he's been involved with here recently in his work. So.
Well, how about some recommendations now, Zach? You want to start us off with that?
Sure. So a couple years ago, I heard about people who rebind Bibles, and I've really never been into that. I'm like, well, if I need a new Bible, I'll just go get one. Anyway, I met a preacher who was really into like custom Bibles and everything like that, and I said, okay, well, the next time you order one, I'll order one too, and we can ship them together. But anyway, there's a company called Cherry Hill Bibles, and they're based out of Canton, Michigan. And anyway, fantastic work. There's all different kinds of leather, like elk and bison and goat skin and cow leather, of course, and all different kinds of colors. And it's awesome because you actually get to talk with the guy who makes them and redoes the binding. And he'll say, well, what do you want here? How many ribbons do you want? What color do you want? But anyway, I'm just going to share the Bible that I got from them. It's a ESV thin line Bible, and I preached from this for a long time, and I just wanted it rebound because it was falling apart. But anyway, I made it Freed Hardeman colors, so I have ESV on there. I've got my initials, and it's in that those Freed Hardeman colors. I got the black and gold ribbons as well. So he does great work. It's called Cherry Hill Bibles. He's on Facebook. Puts out a lot of content, a lot of stuff of what he's working on. So you should check him out.
Very good, Zach. And I know we kind of coordinated on this a little bit, but my recommendation is exactly the same, pretty much. But mine is double A leather. And they rebound this Bible for me. And you can see here how worn it was, how old it was. This is actually a parallel Bible, Greek, Latin, and German. And so they did a very good job. But they come with a lifetime guarantee, not a sponsor yet. But link will be down in the description on them. But they do very good work. There's 2 guys who do that. And, they do all the same thing. How many ribbons do you want? What color do you want? All the different kinds of leather. So they are based out of North Carolina. So depending on where you live, North Carolina versus Michigan. But anyway, those are the 2 Bible binding companies that we highly recommend. And I also wanted to kind of flex my German, Latin, and Greek Bible. So, well, later on, we're going to be talking about Romans 12 and kind of what it's like to live like a Christian. But for the moment, before we bring Dillon on with us, Zach and I are going to kind of dive into part of the life of Christ. And a part for us that is probably one of the, if not the most important steps in Christ's life, and that is the Sermon on the Mount. It begins in Matthew chapter 5, and it rolls all the way through chapter 7. So you think your preacher's long-winded. Jesus went 3 chapters in Matthew. So count your blessings. But there's so much good stuff here. There's so much good material for Christian living. And I guess really the way I want to start this is asking you, Zach, what is your what's your highlight of the Sermon on the Mount? If you took one passage or one section out, what would it be?
Oh, man. Well...
And I totally put you on the spot right there for everybody listening. Zach, I did not prep him for that.
No, it's okay. Because that's a good question. I kind of look at the Sermon on the Mount. It's very easy for us to look at the little parts of it and say, well, you've got the Beatitudes and you've got, this section and this section and this section. And it's very hard for us to look at this as the Sermon on the Mount. And I guess maybe it's not particularly, we weren't there. It's not recorded the same way in the other gospel accounts. It may be a literary action that, Matthew took and just maybe he compiled some of the teachings that Jesus had in a time frame and added some more here or there. But as we see it, it is a sermon which Jesus gives on the mountain, Matthew chapter 5, verse 1. And it's an amazing sermon because you see all of these different parts of being a Christian. You see, and I think it's really interesting how it's organized. So, for instance, in chapter 5, you have, the call to be disciples. That includes the Beatitudes. It includes being salt and being light. It includes some other things as well. He talks about a lot of heart issues, lust and anger and all of these other things. But I guess to answer your question, Logan, one of the things that pops out to me the most is what he says about loving your enemies and what he says about, you love them. You pray for those that persecute you. And it's not even, he's not even implying that you pray that they repent. You're praying that they are blessed. And it's incredible that he takes this turn, and throughout, especially in chapter 5, he says, you've heard it said that, this is how you're supposed to act, but I'm telling you, you're going to go a step further. And I think that's really what the whole Sermon on the Mount is about. Christians go a step further than just being decent human beings. We go far beyond. We go above and beyond because that is the way of Christ. To love without expectations, to forgive, to not judge, but give people the benefit of the doubt. to go with, to serve, to not look for your own glory and your own praise. I love chapter 6. It talks about 3 things that are important for us to do: to pray, to give, and to fast. And all of those things, he says, basically, you do them in secret. You don't do them for glory. You don't do them to be seen. But they're things that you need to do. And so, really, I think that's kind of just some of my thoughts about it, as far as really there's not a one part of this that sticks out to me. It's really that major theme that all of it kind of pulls together.
Well, and that's the way I think it's intended, or at least should be approached. I mean, because when you look at it, it all ties together. I mean, you can't just say, well, I like that part of the sermon, but not that part. It don't work that way. But you're right. It's about doing above and beyond. It really is what this is. And there's even a section in there that literally is about that. In chapter 5, starting at verse 38, say going the second mile. Under Roman law, a Roman soldier could force a Jew to carry their stuff, carry their whatever they had for a mile, and make them carry. That was the law. Jesus doesn't say, you know what, that's plenty. You've done your part. Quit. He says, nuh-uh. Go at 2 miles. Carry extra. Go above and beyond what you're asked to do. I'm asking you to do more than the old law asks you to do. And that's really what being Christ-like, being a Christian, boils down to, is we are supposed to be different. And the different isn't like weird, or it's not a Bible beater. It's being somebody who goes above and beyond. Because you can be weird and be a Bible beater and not be Christ-like.
Right.
I mean, and so, go ahead.
Oh, and I was just going to say that, and Jesus really wraps it up very well in chapter 7 as to what this really is, and how going above and beyond is leading to something else. He talks about those who will enter the kingdom of heaven are those that do the will of the Father who is in heaven, not those that, just profess his name and say, well, I'm a Christian and I do things, for Jesus. It's not just, them. It's, it is those that do the will of the Father. He then adds a little parable about the wise man who built his house on the rock. And if you notice what he says there, he says, everyone who hears these words of mine and does them is like a man who builds his house on a rock. So he's leading this idea that when you are doing above and beyond, you're actually being obedient to this word that I've given to you. You're being obedient to the Father. And then he really does wrap up, starting in verse 28, about the authority. There's the authority of Jesus. He taught with an authority that they had never seen. And it's because he had the authority to speak as he did.
Right. Well, absolutely. And that authority is a big part of where all this comes from, is that he is the Son of God. Like we said, we want to kind of keep our hand back on Matthew 5, 6, and 7, but we're also going to kind of move forward into Romans 12. And I know that Dillon's got a lot to say about that, and so I feel like I'm kind of ready to bring him in. And let's start talking. But before we do that, I want to kind of introduce him. Dillon is the education minister at the Keller Church of Christ in Keller, Texas. He is also a co-host, one of the 3 co-hosts on the podcast Bible Conversations. I believe you can find that podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. I think that's all I had to say about him.
And he's your brother.
He's my brother. I guess we've kind of already mentioned that. He graduated from Freed-Hardeman University in 2019, and at some point we will get somebody on here who's not a Freed grad. But Dillon, how are you doing today, man?
Oh, man, I'm doing good. I'm excited to be on here with y'all. This is awesome. Yeah, thanks for that introduction. Also, I wanted to actually make a quick note. Zack, you were asking about, if we did any fighting growing up, and Logan kind of explained that not much because we were such a different age, but I think he kind of took advantage of that sometimes and knew that he was able to beat up on me, but my parents also knew that, so he waited till they were gone. There's one story, I can't believe he left this out, but my parents were away at a date night when he was in high school sometime. I was, probably 6th grade. or something, and I think it was Logan's idea because I wouldn't have done this, but he came up with the great idea that we can use my mom's oven mitts as boxing gloves.
Well, we had been watching Rocky.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to box like Rocky.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and so we just traded punches with the oven mitts because we each only got one oven mitt. So yeah, no, I just want to say that I'm happy to be on here with y'all and thank y'all for having me on here. Well, do you want me to go ahead and take the lead here on Romans chapter 12?
Well, before we get there, Dillon, let's
Okay.
ask. We want to kind of get to know you for our listeners.
Okay.
We've got some personal questions. Obviously, you co-host your own podcast. Can you tell us a little bit about that? We're gonna want you to plug it real quick.
Okay, yeah. So we started it back in April is when we started recording. It was, right when people started going into quarantine from COVID, and yet our church office was still open, and so we were like, hey, let's do this. I don't even remember really how the idea came up. Doing podcasts or something I've been wanting to do for a long time. I think it was even my senior year of high school, Logan. I was wanting to do some kind of video form of just like weekly devotional type things, and it's been something I've been wanting to do since then, off and on in college. Just never really like made something happen, and so then we started it back in April, and we post episodes each Friday, have some guests on every so often, but like the name entails, Bible conversations. We just want to have conversations about the Bible. We don't want to get preachy. We don't want people to feel like they're being talked down to. All of our listeners, we want to make sure they feel like they can be part of the conversation. So that's really important to us.
That's awesome, and we'll definitely link your podcast in the description below. Zach and I will go back and forth on some questions here with you, Dillon, but I'm going to start it off with, you've been married since January, correct?
Yes, January 4th.
How is married life treating you?
It's awesome. It's really great. I'm sitting here in my man cave right now. So if anybody's wondering, like, is that his bed when he's in trouble? No. This is actually the bed that I had throughout high school and whatnot. And so when we moved into this apartment, my parents were like, hey, you can have that, put it in your man cave, whatnot. So, but marriage life is great. Probably the biggest hurdle that we've had to get over is trying to coordinate with one another's schedules. It's way different being a single person, especially in college, where you're like, okay, I know my schedule. I can go get dinner whenever I want. I can go out and play video games because I got nothing else to do the rest of the day. It's way different, knowing that there's somebody else's schedule that you're having to incorporate into your own. So, but overall, marriage is awesome.
Yeah, so you got to get permission every once in a while when you want to go do something, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I went from having to get permission from my mom for 18 years to getting permission from nobody for 4 years, and now I got to get permission from my wife.
Oh, wow. Well, you are an education minister, and that's
Yes.
interesting. I don't run into a lot of education ministers, and so really, what is that role like? What do you do for the church there?
Yeah, so the way this came about is actually at Keller, we try to use team ministry as best we can. So obviously we have a pulpit minister, and as well as a youth and family minister. I think those are pretty much the typical ones that every congregation sees. But we also have an outreach minister, and I'm the education minister. And so what it is really is that we're just working with one another, and the title is just kind of what they slapped on there to say, hey, this kind of fits. But I work with the outreach minister whenever we're trying to evangelize. Evangelism and education go hand in hand. If you want to evangelize somebody, you have to educate them about Christ. With the youth and family minister, his job is to educate the teens and build a solid foundation on them. And so really, when you think about education within the church, it's in every part of the church. Even the pulpit minister, as he's preaching and proclaiming the gospel, that's in essence educating them and building a solid foundation within everyone in the church. And so I guess you'd say my day-to-day work kind of involves everybody from cradle roll to the oldest of the adult classes, setting up curriculum for them all, making sure every class has Bible teachers. But yeah, everyone from kids to adults, making sure that their Bible classes are running smoothly. That's the condensed form of my job, but education goes way beyond just Bible class.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I've always admired, churches that do a good team ministry really well, where you can kind of have your hand in many different things at once, and you also have people that are helping you and encourage you and leading and doing all of that as well.
And that's the really important part is the men who are leading us, our elders. If they, did not set up this plan before they brought in all the men to be ministers here, then it wouldn't work as well. They had this vision for team ministry, for these ministers to be able to work together, for education to complement outreach, for outreach to complement youth and family, and all of that working together. So the leadership, our elders really have paved the way for us to do some great things.
That's awesome, Dillon. Zack and I, as ministers, we appreciate that. One thing that I'm really interested in as we talk about your ministry is what led you there. Where did you just, most ministers don't just wake up one day and say, that's what I'm going to do. But what got you where you're at with as far as your mindset goes?
Yeah, so back in high school, I thought I was going to play in the MLB. Obviously, I'm not. But, baseball is a huge part of my life. When I was thinking about where I'm going to go to college, it was either Freed-Hardeman or Harding, and I wanted to play baseball. Well, we went and talked with the coaches, and, it was kind of like you can probably come try out. They didn't. It was just a meeting with them. They didn't have any tape on me or anything like that. It was just kind of like you can come try out. We'll see what you got. But it was really after meeting with both the coach at Harding and the coach at Freed that I was kind of like, I don't know if I want to do that. It was kind of a realization for me of like, that's life. The guys who, I mean, even in high school, if you play sports, that kind of becomes your life. But especially after that, if you play any college athletics, that is 100% your life. And I kind of just had the realization, like, I don't know if I want that to be my life. I won't have the opportunity to do some other things. And I had already thought about ministry, but it was when I realized I'm going to have to make a choice that it wasn't even like something I had to mull over of whether, okay, do I choose athletics, do I choose baseball and try to develop that more and just major in something simple, or do I choose Bible? And so I already knew I wanted to do one of those two, but when I realized that I actually did have to make a choice, it was not really a tough decision. It was kind of like, well, that's what I'm going to do. And I often think when I believe it's in John chapter 6 when many of Christ's followers just walked away because his teaching was difficult, and Jesus turned to the 12 and said, what, are y'all going to walk away too? And Peter turned to him and said, where else would we go? To whom shall we go? That's kind of honestly the way I describe it. When I was looking at this and thinking, okay, what am I going to do with my life? It was kind of like, what else am I going to do? There wasn't really another option. So.
Well, that's really encouraging to hear. When you have that desire and that heart for ministry, to just kind of think, well, I can't do anything else. This is where my heart's led me to be, and where God is leading me to be, and it's very encouraging to hear that. Now we've kind of dove into the Sermon on the Mount already a little bit. What are some thoughts, some of the major takeaways that you see from the Sermon on the Mount?
Well, what Logan was saying a little bit ago about, this is just Jesus calling them to say, do better. That I think is 100% spot on. Jesus is saying, you've been doing this your life. You've been told you can do this. You've been said this is the law. And one thing after another, Jesus is raising the bar. Jesus is continuing to say, this has been your bar. I'm going to say, jump up here. It's one thing after another, and I think that's something that honestly today can still be really applicable for us. There's a lot of times when we just get in a groove and saying, okay, I've jumped to this bar that's been set by man. I've jumped to saying, hey, I look like a good Christian. And yet again, we have to remember that Christ has set the bar to his standard. We're supposed to be like Christ. We're not supposed to be like the best Christian that I know in my life. I can think of a lot of preachers that I'm like, man, he is a solid Christian, but I'm not called to try to meet that standard. I'm called to meet Christ's standard. And I think throughout the whole Sermon on the Mount, that's what Jesus is emphasizing over and over.
That's perfect. I mean, that's exactly what the Sermon on the Mount's about. And there's times where Jesus is like, he doesn't say the words "do better," obviously, but that's his point. Is like, look, the old law is going away, and you got away with a lot under that old law. And he talks about that when he's asked about divorce. He's like, well, under the old law, God allowed it because your hearts were hard. But let me tell you what God really wants, and it's only on the case of infidelity. And so you look at that, and it's just it opens up your mind, it opens up your heart. It's just so different. And one thing I want to hit on, something that sticks out to me from the Sermon on the Mount that we haven't touched on yet, before we move over to Romans 12, is there in chapter 6, beginning in verse 25. And it's in most Bibles, that section is titled "The Cure for Anxiety." If you know somebody, or you or somebody who has anxiety, it's easy. It's more complicated than just the cure. Like, it's not like the flu, or it's not like think of a disease that just you can cure. It's not like that. And I've known a lot of people who they suffer with anxiety, and they read that and they're like, that helps maybe a little. It's tough. And so I kind of want to touch on that because of where we're at in the world right now. With elections coming up, with racial tension, with coronavirus still out there, I can only imagine what some people are dealing with as far as anxiety goes. But the reason I wanted to hit on that is because I fully believe this is the cure for anxiety. And Jesus basically just says, don't worry. I mean, his first words in that section, don't worry. And it's more complicated than that for a lot of people, but really when it boils down to it is, let God deal with it. Let God deal with the virus. Let God deal with the racial tension. Do your part as a Christian, and that is the nexus of the Sermon on the Mount. It's almost exactly right smack dab in the middle, and it's kind of like everything, if you do your part, God's going to do his part. The only thing that Jesus says not to worry about is anxiety. He doesn't say, hey, don't worry about fasting. Don't worry about prayer. No. He says, you take care of your stuff, and God's going to take care of his stuff, because that's the God we serve. And so I just think that that's kind of interesting. That's the nexus, for me anyway, of the Sermon on the Mount. And Zach, that kind of goes back to what you're talking about with, you can't take parts out of this thing. You look at it as a whole. And Jesus is saying, look, you do your stuff, you be Christ-like, and God's going to take care of his stuff.
That actually ties right into something that I've been trying to share with our congregation here at Keller and share with anybody that I talk to. Dealing with 2020 is, it's simple. Do not worry. But something that ties into that I try to share is Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And that verse is so often taken out of context. But when you look at it, it's essentially Paul saying, I can be content in every situation of life because I know Christ is with me. And Jesus is saying the same thing here. You don't have to worry because you know God is in control. So that's definitely something to keep in mind and to keep encouraging people with now more than ever.
Yeah, I think that's something actually you did very well with the. There's an episode of your podcast when you're with Christ. You're not worried about all of these things that are happening in the world, and that's something as Christians that we have that is, I guess, is something, one, that the world can't understand and doesn't understand. And it gives us a leg up whenever we face life, is having that assurance and that confidence and that peace.
Well, I kind of want to see where Dillon would like to take this now, because when Dillon first came on, when I first talked to Dillon about coming on, rather, I said, "Is there something that you think you want to talk about?" He's like, Romans 12, and so Dillon, we have the Sermon on the Mount and we have Romans 12, and I could do it, but I want to see what your thoughts are. Tie those together for us.
Yeah. So essentially, obviously, like we said, Sermon on the Mount is Christ not saying this, but saying this: do better. Or not saying do better, but he's saying you're gonna have to do better under my law. I'm calling you to be a better person, to go the second mile, to do better. And that's really what we see, especially in Romans 12, starting in verse 9. I'm going to go ahead and read it because it's not a huge chunk. But Romans chapter 12, starting in verse 9, says, "Let love be genuine. Abhor what is evil, hold fast to what is good. Love one another with brotherly affection. Outdo one another in showing honor." Now I'm going to stop right there, because that is such powerful language when you hear that. Outdo one another in showing honor. Now, especially right now, and I don't like to get political, and I'm sure y'all don't either, but right now in 2020, and it's an election year, there's a lot of controversy going on about how we deal with pandemics, and for goodness sake, should Christians be outdoing one another and showing honor instead of outdoing one another in their opinions and beliefs? Absolutely we should. And sometimes it's like once every 4 years or once every so often, it's, oh, well, I'm going to forget about showing honor to one another. But the reason that we respect one another, the reason we honor one another is not even because of my love for you, which I love y'all, but I'm not going to respect y'all because I love y'all. I'm going to respect you because I love Christ. And it's out of my reverence for Christ that I love and respect y'all. So anyways, let me keep going. I just wanted to make that little note about outdoing one another and showing honor and what that really means. But continuing in verse 11, "Do not be slothful in zeal. Be fervent in spirit, serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope, be patient in tribulation, be constant in prayer, contribute to the needs of the saints, and seek to show hospitality." Let me ask y'all a question. Is there somebody in your life where you're like, wow, they're a solid Christian? I really, when I'm 60, 70 years old, I wish people would look up to me the way I can look up to that person. Do y'all have somebody like that? When you think of that person and you read this scripture, you're like, wow, they understand this and they do this. That's precisely what we've been called to do. The title over the passage is Marks of a True Christian. But the thing that I want to point out is, why do we think we have to wait to be a solid Christian until we're seasoned in our years? I think that's a mistake that a lot of people have made, saying, look to this older person and look to them as being a solid Christian. And I've heard that example a lot of times, but I've also heard the passage, do not let people look down upon you because of your youth, but set the example through love, through everything. And so the example of, hey, look to them, they're a solid Christian. Yeah, that's great, but why can I not be that example right now at 22 years old now? I forgot I'm 22. Why can I not be that example now? I think it's kind of just a passing the buck, if you will, of I'll be a Christian people can look up to when I'm older. But if Jesus is really raising the bar, if Jesus is really saying do better, that's right now.
Right. So, and something that's actually happening here in Moultrie is we're trying to establish elders. And the time to train to be an elder is not when you're 50 years old. It's, the qualities that are present, or we might call them qualifications or qualities of elders, those are things in which every Christian ought to have. The training in those things ought to begin the moment you come out of that water. I mean, really, to be honest, we don't wait until we get to be older and just say, well, miraculously, I have all of this Bible knowledge. When I turned 50,
Yeah.
I had so much more Bible knowledge than when I was 49. And it just doesn't happen that way. And if we're going to grow to be those wonderful and faithful Christians that we do look up to, they didn't get that way by just waiting around and waiting to get older. They got that way by being faithful through their life. And so that's a challenge, I think, that this passage is really kind of showing for all Christians. These are marks that every Christian should have, regardless of where you are. It's something you strive for.
Yeah, and I think that what we see here in the second half of Romans 12 is so, it's a big pill to swallow. And, we kind of talked about that. And a lot of people, like y'all said, a lot of people younger, and when I'm talking about 40 years old and younger, they read that and it becomes, well, I can do some of that. But here's kind of my thought on that, is that there's a point to where you have to look at yourself and you have to understand that you don't have to change who you are to be like Christ. I think a lot of times, and this is something that has not been done very well, but we need to make sure we're telling people, you're not changing you. God made you. He just wants to take out the things that you put in, right? He wants to take out the things that you're making yourself to pretend to be, and make you and have that Christ-likeness shine through. Because when we strip away the world, we are like Christ. We're his. He calls us brother and sister. We are related to him on a deeper level than we understand. God's not asking you to change. Jesus isn't asking you in the Sermon on the Mount to change. He's just asking you to continue to be yourself, but stop thinking like everybody else.
Right. Well, I think there is a change, and I guess maybe there's just the semantics of it.
Right, and I totally agree with you. So I'm talking about who you are as a person. I'm a jokester. I like to have fun. God's not asking me to stand up and be rigid, and I'm a fun guy. I like to have fun. I like to play pranks. I like to joke around. God at no point is asking me to sit down and be quiet. He's asking me to let my Christ-likeness that is innately in me shine through.
Yeah, if you don't mind me jumping in, I think that's really the beauty of the church, is that, each one of us has our own personality. And something that I've heard that is really wise is that, especially for preachers, when you're preaching, that's just God's word poured through your personality. And sometimes we try to change our personality to being a Christian. There's no Christian personality. Each one of us has our own personality, and yet we can change the bad to let Christ shine through that. Something I'm actually talking with the teens right now on Wednesday nights. We're talking about the question, does the Bible have errors? And that's kind of our topic on Wednesday nights. But one of the things that I talked with them about last week is, whether or not God has errors. Because if God is error-free and the Bible is his word, then the Bible is error-free. But in asking that question, I talked to them about the problem of evil, because that'll be something that people try to use to say God has errors. Obviously, just look at evil. But that's the thing. Evil does not exist. Evil is simply the absence of good. Just as darkness does not exist, darkness is just the absence of light. And so, for Christians, when we die to ourselves and become alive to Christ, that is, adding good back into our lives. Before we become Christians, we just have the absence of good in our lives, and that's what evil is. But with Christ, we're adding that good back to our lives.
Right, and I think that's excellent, because we're all different. We have Christ, and He is coming out through us. Really, I don't want to say that the best commentary for our discussion is the rest of this chapter, but really, it kind of is. What we're talking about has just almost naturally reflected what the rest of this whole chapter is. I love the book of Romans. Is one of my favorite books, and it's an interesting, I guess the way that I see it, it's broken down into 3 parts. The first 3 chapters are what have we done? This is what we've done. This is our sin, the consequences, and then picking up halfway through chapter 3 and through chapter 11, you really see God's response to that. What has he done? And then chapter 12 kind of has this interesting opener. It says, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God. And really, from chapter 3 to chapter 11, those are the mercies of God. And so from that point, he says to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable to God. And then verse 2 says one of my favorite words in the Greek language, metamorpheo, which is the metamorphosis. It's sort of this transfiguration with us through the power of God and by the will of God, so that we can discern right. And then he goes into the church, and we're all members of this body. We're all different. We each have different gifts, and so I just think it's interesting how our conversation has naturally reflected what else is in this chapter.
Absolutely. It's one thing to show, to say, I'm going to be like Christ. And it's one thing to show that and to live that. It's another thing for when the doors are closed, when you're by yourself, are you still that way? And a lot of ministers, and I'm going to be really careful how I say this. I have known ministers, and when I say ministers, I'm not talking about somebody who's paid for it. I'm talking about somebody who is a Christian and is ministering like God calls us to. You don't have to be paid for it. I have known Christians, I've known ministers who, when the doors are shut, they are different.
That's the definition of integrity is, are you the same person whether you're seen by man or not? But that's the thing about integrity, is that we're always seen by God. Even though we think we're behind closed doors and may act differently, we're always seen by God. And so, somebody has good integrity. Somebody is solid in that form when they're the same before man as they are the same before God.
Yeah, that's kind of where it was leading into it. That is that there's when you live Christ-like, it's not as show. Mm-hmm. It's not intended to show out for other people. I can't think of anybody specifically, thank goodness, that it comes to mind who it's like they do it for a show. But there may be somebody, and you may be listening to this, and it's you. And that's it's not the end for you. But that's not what it's about. Why are you living like Christ? It's for others. I mean, it's because you've been asked to. And it's because who we are, and we've alluded to this, who we are is that. And anything beyond that is what the world or what Satan has added on to us.
Yeah. And, Logan, I think you're bringing up a really good point that, you may be listening to this podcast and thinking, am I living to put on a show? But honestly, I think we've all been guilty of that. There's not a single Christian alive who is not, at some time or another, been trying to put on a mask, been trying to be a Christian for nobody else other than themselves. So I don't want this to come across as like hey, we're really beating down people who are putting on masks. No, that's just something else that as Christians we've been called to do better, just like we've been called to do better with everything else in the Sermon on the Mount. So yeah, it is something that is a struggle and that many people do struggle with, and Christ just says, hey, you can do better, you got this. That's the picture of God sometimes, as people see him as looking down saying, no, you're wrong, you're gonna bad. But really the picture of God that we should have is a legit father who's walking next to us, and whenever we trip and stumble, he's not saying, I can't believe you tripped. He reaches down his hand, and that hand is grace. It's up to us to reach out and grab that grace and stand back up and keep walking with him.
Well, something you said there, I think, has just brought us full circle perfectly. And it's that it is a true father. And what to me, that shows is how important it is to be a good, godly parent. Because as a parent, as a father, it's my job to show my daughter how God feels about her.
Yeah.
And if I'm not acting like Christ-like, if I'm not acting how God acted towards me, then I am showing her a false image. And I know I've had friends who struggle with the idea of God as a father because of their relationship with their father. Mm-hmm. And you know, I don't want my daughter to feel that way. And so that ties back to kind of how we began this conversation with the value of living Christ-like in the home.
Yeah. And
that's kind of the direction I intended this to go. And so I appreciate you bringing that full circle. Well, Dillon, we appreciate you being here today. We've really appreciated the discussion. You know, I think that we haven't said anything that's like groundbreaking or earth-shattering, but you know, sometimes it's good to remember, you know, how important it is that we show Christ to others. And that's something every night with my daughter I pray, and I mean, she's 2, so she's not really grasping it, but she will.
Yeah.
God help us tomorrow, that everybody we interact with, that we act like Christ with them.
Yep.
And that's something I really strive to do myself. How would Jesus treat this person? Mm-hmm. But Dillon, before we go, we've got one more thing for you before we let you go.
All right.
So pod decks are an incredible tool, interviewing tool that are used for interview questions and episode starting prompts, and they are in the palm of your hand. So whether you are a new podcaster or an existing broadcaster looking to grow your audience or to get more engagement, you're going to want to check out pod decks. Use the code bearing up one word, and you'll get 10% off your first order. So very excited about our sponsor, pod decks.
All right, Dillon, I'll go ahead and get us started here with our first one. If you could ask one person one question and they had to truthfully answer, who and what would you ask?
Oh, man. Probably would ask, like, I don't know, I'm split between 2 people and 2 questions that I want to ask. But it would probably be my wife, and I would ask her what I do that annoys her most, so I would know not to do that.
You don't think she would answer you truthfully right now?
I don't know, because there's some things that I really like doing, like singing, that she knows I love, and I know that annoys her, but I don't know if that's the thing that annoys her most. But
gotcha.
But I'd get an honest answer.
There you go.
Okay, so next question is, if you could instantly become an expert in one thing, what would that be?
Ooh, probably in all things digital. Especially the world we're living in now. If I can just like just instantly become an expert and say, hey, we're going to have like top of the line website for a church. We're going to have like top of the line equipment for every video that we make, every live stream service that we have, top of the line equipment for our podcast. I don't know, if I could be an instant expert in anything digital that way, especially in the world we're living in now, that'd be really cool. But yeah, I've been trying to do some self-teaching, but being an instant expert would be great.
That'd make it a lot easier, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
All right. Last question from me is, if you had someone following you around all the time, what would you have them do?
Like, can I have them like pick up food for me?
Yeah.
Yeah, like they would always have a like Whataburger Dr. Pepper ready for me if I had them doing something. I'm assuming we're talking about like somebody following me like a butler, not a stalker.
Sure.
All right.
So if you could go back in time and meet any person in U.S. history and talk with them for a discussion, who would it be?
You know, this might be kind of deep for this portion of the episode, because I feel like this is supposed to be more lighthearted, and I'm giving y'all deep answers. But Martin Luther King Jr. And I would ask him what he would do today. and take his wisdom and his advice and along with the wisdom of Christ and the advice of Christ, and see what kind of difference we can make.
Dillon, we're so very thankful to have you on the show, and just to encourage you, I'm very thankful to know you. I've got to know you a little bit through the podcast and through some of your work that you've been doing recently, and I've just been so encouraged by everything that you do, and so keep it up. Keep working for the Lord, and just keep at it.
I appreciate it, and y'all too. It's always encouraging when you can get together with men that also love the church and want to see her grow and reach the lost. So y'all keep up the good work as well.
All right, and please remember to like and share this video on Facebook, YouTube. Follow us, subscribe, do all of those fun things. We also have an Instagram and Twitter account as well, so please follow us on social media.
And if you know anybody, a young minister who you think would be good to be on here and needs to be encouraged, send us recommendations, and we'll see. We'll reach out to them and see if they want to come on.
If you are interested in us having a question and answer episode, please leave your questions in the comments section, or send us a private message, or send us an email with that question as well. Whether it be about us or anything Bible related, we'd love to do that.
Finally, the most important thing we want to hear from you is your prayer requests. If you need prayers of any kind, message us, email us, and you will get prayed for. You can guarantee that. On that note, Dillon, would you bow with us as we close in our prayer today?
Absolutely.
Dear Lord, our God, our Father in heaven, we thank you so much for today, and I thank you for my physical brother, but my actual spiritual brother as well here who joined us today. And I pray that you bless him in his ministry, and that you bless him in everything he does. God, I pray that anybody who's listening to this podcast right now, that they've been encouraged, that they've been uplifted, and God, above all, that you were glorified. We thank you and we love you. It's in Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks for watching, everyone.